Hello there, everybody. So, today we're going to talk about states and what states are best or better for an owner operator to do business in. So, I'm here in Texas, and there's a saying in Texas. It's like, I wasn't born in Texas, but I got here as fast as I could. you know, Texas is quickly becoming the best state in the country to do business. It used to be California. California, when I grew up, was the hottest state. Reagan was the governor of California before he became president. California was a very red state, and it was like Texas is today. But over the decades, Texas or California has become a cautionary tale for the rest of the country. It's like, don't become California. And when people from California come to your state, it's like, don't California my state. Leave your California politics in California if you're coming to Texas. Last thing we want is have the problems that California has. We don't want that in Texas. You know, they say that the thing with California is based around the amnesty bill during Reagan. Reagan made a deal with the Democrats, and the deal was border security in exchange for amnesty for illegal aliens. So this has been an issue for many decades. Illegal aliens. I mean, it goes all the way back to Eisenhower and beyond that. It's always been an issue. So Reagan made a deal for border security in exchange for amnesty. And the Democrats reneged on the deal. They took the amnesty and never, ever supported the border security. That was part of the problem. And then the Californians at the time did not want to integrate the illegal immigrant children into their school system. It became a problem. Now in Texas, they did the opposite approach. Texas is very welcoming to all people. And they didn't do that type of strategy, but they did in California, and as a result, there's a big divide in California between Democrats and Republicans, and it's been Democrat ever since. So it's too bad. I think California is one of the most pretty states in the country. Having driven through it, dozens of times, the scenery is spectacular. But huge homeless problem, massive homeless problem, and they have a lot of bad government policies. So you think California AB 5 that outlaws independent contractors, for example, it's terrible. It's terrible. Texas would never do that. So by comparison, if you were an owner operator, Texas is by far a lot better than California. Uh, there's other things that you want to look at in different states. Now, you could live in any part of the country you want, but there are certain advantages for being in some states over other states. Several states do not have an income tax. Texas does not have an income tax. We don't punish people for working. Some states, a lot of blue states, for example, tax people's income. So they're working for a wage, and then the government, state government's taking part of that, and it's kind of punitive in nature. Texas doesn't do that. There's several other states that also don't have an income tax. I think South Dakota, Tennessee, Alaska, Florida, you know, um, Wyoming. These states reward people to work. It's like, we're not going to tax your income, so make as much money as you can. Texas has a culture, for example, that uh, kind of appreciates people becoming successful. There's no like there's not a lot of envy, class envy in Texas. If you see someone with a fantastic looking, Chevy 4x4, it probably costs 75,000. You're like, man, good for him. But if you're in another part of the country, somebody will, be jealous or envious or some negative aspect of why someone shouldn't be successful. It's a different mindset. In Texas, we celebrate success, and northern states, they seem to uh, have a grudge against people who are successful, as if they didn't become successful on their own. That somehow uh, they cheated the system in order to become successful. That's not the way in Texas. People celebrate each other's success in Texas. We want people to be successful. So there's a big difference. Now, being in Texas, we'll have to say that you should avoid Oklahoma at all costs. you know, these two states don't get along too well. But I think Oklahoma's just jealous they're not Texas. Having come from outside of Texas into Texas, and I'm a neutral arbitrator here. I think just Oklahoma is jealous, but but you know, there's a big difference in regulations. Texas is pro-business. So if you're going to register your company as a LLC or S corp, Texas is going to protect you as a business owner. If you're in California or New Jersey or Illinois, the government is very heavy-handed there, and they're not pro-business. They are left-leaning. So they're more likely to target small businesses. When the Democrats say tax the rich, what they're really saying is tax small businesses. A good question for a Democrat politician is, what are you going to do for small businesses? And, see what their answer is. And they'll tell you, we're going to make sure they pay their fair share. You're already paying taxes like crazy. It's never enough. So there are politics between states. Some states politics are really bad, and other states is really good. Arkansas is coming a long way. Arkansas may eliminate their state income tax, and they're doing more and more pro-business things. Arkansas elected, Bill Clinton, hometown was in Arkansas. They have a history of having a strong Democrat base, but they've been turning Republican over the last few decades, and they're getting to be more and more pro-business, and they've come a long way. There's a rivalry between Arkansas and Mississippi about who's worse off. Yeah, the guy from Mississippi looks across the river and says, "Thank God I'm not from Arkansas," and vice versa. But Arkansas has come a long way. Tennessee is great for business. Tennessee is becoming a favorite spot for companies to move from these blue states to a red state. I think that's the general theme is, if you're a business, you're going to be better off in a red state than a blue state. During COVID and the mask mandate, blue states were shutting down businesses, and red states were keeping businesses open. It was like a black and white difference. It's like, okay, there's two different approaches. Blue states were punishing small businesses, and red states were keeping their schools open and promoting, normal business activity. They didn't want to shut down the small businesses. So there are differences. Nebraska, for example, where Crete is located, no sales tax on trucks, which is like, if you're in Texas, you could pay 6 or 8% sales tax if you buy a truck in Texas from a dealership. But if you buy a truck from Crete, since Crete's based in Nebraska, as is Warner, there's no sales tax on trucks. That saves you 6% right there. So as a business owner, as an owner-operator, don't overlook what states have to offer. And if you're in a blue state, you may want to give that some thought. You're like, I'm going to be in business for the next 20 years. I'm in a blue state. Maybe I should register my business in a red state, or maybe you should move to a red state. These are business strategies, long-term business strategies. And there's advantages for doing that. I mean, if you don't have to pay income tax, that saves you thousands of dollars every single year. You do that over 20 years, that's a large chunk of change. That's money you could be investing in your stock portfolio. So, you know, this is another aspect of the owner-operator business model. It's not all about what is DOT doing or the FMCSA. You know, it's not all federal. It's state. What's the state doing? You know, so look at your state, you know, and compare it to other states and say, what state is better for me to do business in? All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.